Har vi Good morning, everyone, and a special welcome to our distinguished guests, Mary Lawlor, and our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Anniken Huitfeldt, and Omar from the Norwegian, from Oslo community. Today, we are going to discuss something very important. How can we defend the human rights defenders? We have a very special and strong panel here today. They will be introduced by Ingeborg from Human Rights Fund in just a little while. And they will be discussing how we can combat or tackle the risk that human rights defenders are facing in the world today. So without further ado, I just welcome you so much. Hope you will enjoy the next hour, and really looking forward to listening to all of you. I give the Ingeborg a big applause. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. It's very nice to see so many people here. For a non-morning person like me, I'm always impressed when people show up at 8. My name is Ingeborg. I'm the director of the Norwegian Human Rights Fund, and I will take you through the rest of the morning together. This year, it's 25 years since the UN approved the Declaration on Human Rights Defenders. It's a year to celebrate the important work done by human rights defenders across the world. It's a year to reflect on the risks human rights defenders continue to face. And it's a timely moment to look at our own efforts to support human rights defenders and reflect on what more can be done. On an international level, Norway has given priority to supporting human rights defenders in the UN for decades now. Norway chaired the working group that drew up the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders and was instrumental in the establishment of the mandate of the Special Rapporteur. And Norway still leads the negotiations in the UN on protection of human rights defenders. We look very much forward to hearing more now about how the government plans to take its work on human rights defenders forward. And we are very glad to have the Foreign Minister with us today. So with that introduction, I'm glad to be able to give the floor to Minister of Foreign Affairs, Anniken Huitfeldt. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ingeborg and Kjersti. Dear Mary, ladies and gentlemen, friends in the human rights community. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Article 1 of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights presents both a fact and a vision. These words are as relevant today as they were 75 years ago. They were not chosen by accident. They were famously crafted by Eleanor Roosevelt and her colleagues, building on their experiences of war and on their vision for peace. Let me also highlight the contribution of Indian feminist and author Hansa Mehta. She was the Indian delegate to the UN Human Rights Commission at the time. And it is she who is credited with changing the language from all men are born free and equal in the initial draft to the text we know today. A significant change, and sadly still pertinent in 2023. Like Hansa Mehta, individuals have always played a key role in promoting human rights. Standing here in this room, we are reminded of the many Nobel Peace Prize laureates who have fought for human rights, peace and democracy. Last year's laureates, Alice Bialetsky Memorial and the Center for Civil Liberties, and before them, Bangani Mattai, Shirin Abedi, Lech Walesa, Andrei Sakharov, René Cassin, Martin Luther King, Karl Ossietzky, to name but a few. At a time when authoritarianism is on the rise, we must continue to take inspiration from their work. In more and more countries, we are seeing less freedom of expression, in particular for women. We are witnessing wider repression of civil society and more media censorship. We are also seeing increased attacks on journalists and media workers, which in turn can lead to self-censorship. It is clear that authoritarian leaders are learning from each other. Once again, authoritarianism is a means of compensating for weakness. Only weak leaders feel threatened by the freedom of others. Some argue that we should not engage with authoritarian leaders. As I see it, defending freedom of expression by boycotting dialogue is somewhat of a paradox. I will continue to raise human rights abuses with those in power, and I will continue to stress that the efforts of leaders to restrict independent media and civil society only serve to highlight their weakness. They also attest to the effectiveness of civil society and human rights defenders as checks of power and drivers of change. There are many examples of progress achieved by human rights defenders. In Colombia, a case brought before the Constitutional Court by a civil society alliance led to the decriminalization of abortion. In Belize and Botswana, human rights defenders successfully challenged the validity of discriminating laws used to criminalize same-sex relations. Regrettably, we also have countless examples of setbacks. Authoritarian leaders have used restrictions on women's access to abortion and contraceptives as a political tool. Women and LGBTI+ persons are often first to lose their rights when liberal leaders shun democracy. The rise of authoritarianism is a threat to all of us. It undermines a rules-based world order based on international law and respect for human rights. The war in Ukraine brings home what's at stake. Before Russia's illegal war of aggression, a vibrant and active Ukrainian civil society played a key role in Ukraine's democratic development. Today, those organizations are instrumental in documenting human rights violations and abuses committed by Russian forces, collecting evidence and ensuring that victims receive assistance. They are key partners in the international efforts to ensure accountability. Last May, I visited Bucha. I will never forget what I saw and heard there. Last year, I met Alexandra Mativuchtuk, the leader of the Center for Civil Liberties. She stressed the need for justice and accountability to secure lasting peace. I fully agree. The work of human rights defenders is crucial to succeed in building sustainable societies. But all too often, defenders pay the highest price. Frontline defenders reported that 401 human rights defenders were killed last year worldwide. Many others were threatened, attacked, or detained for doing their work. We are currently updating the ministry's guidelines for Norway's efforts to protect and support human rights defenders. Promoting a safe and enabling environment is a priority for Norway. Our diplomatic missions play a key role in supporting defenders at risk. I hope the panel discussions today will provide insights that can inform the new guidelines. Friends, the principles set out in the declarations we are celebrating today remain the best tools for promoting peace and sustainable development. To all human rights defenders here, you are on the front lines in safeguarding democracy. I thank you for your tireless efforts to defend our shared values and norms. Thank you to the organizer for the opportunity to set the stage for your very, very important discussions here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Foreign Minister. We know you have a busy day ahead. We will continue with the panel conversations after this. Before we go on, I just wanted to thank the Nobel Peace Center and the UN Association in Norway for co-hosting this event together with us this morning. We have a panel of 4 people with us today, but we're going to take it step by step and invite 2 of them to the panel first. So please, Mary Lawlor and Sandra Petersen, if you want to join me on stage, and you can give them an applause while they walk up. So let me start by introducing you two, although many people in the audience will know both of you already. I don't know if you want to turn the seats a little bit, Sandra, so that we see you. Good. Following an initiative by Norway, the UN established the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on the situation for human rights defenders back in the year 2000. This post is currently held by Mary Lawlor, who we are very grateful to have with us today. Mary, you were born and raised in Ireland, where you also became the founder and director of Frontline Defenders, mentioned by the Foreign Minister in her speech. And you were the director there for the most part of the 2 first decades of the 2000s. Prior to that, you were also head of section for Amnesty International in Ireland, and you're adjunct professor of business and human rights at Trinity University in Dublin. And we like to say that people are like friends of Norway, and I think you are a friend of Norway. We're glad to have you here again in Oslo. Sandra Petersen is a doctoral research fellow at the Norwegian Centre for Human Rights. She's also my predecessor in this job and held this job for more than a decade as head of the Norwegian Human Rights Fund, and has many, many years of experience in working with civil society and human rights defenders globally. Her current research investigates international efforts to support human rights defenders by focusing on the role of Norway. So Mary, let me start with you. We've now heard from the Foreign Minister on Norway's priorities in the work to support human rights defenders. We can start by maybe asking you, how has Norway's role been important during these past 25 years for support to human rights defenders?
Well, I suppose the first thing to say is it was absolutely wonderful that Norway was so instrumental in the creation and implementation of an eventual adoption of the Declaration on Human Rights Defenders, which basically says that any individual or group or organ of society can promote and protect human rights and fundamental freedoms. So it sets out exactly, more or less what a human rights defender is. And I think it's important for us to remember that there is a right to defend human rights, the rights enshrined in the Universal Declaration and other international standards. And then after pushing for the declaration, Norway has kept and is keeping the issue of human rights defenders on the international agenda As most of you might know or don't know, Norway is responsible for the UN resolution at the Human Rights Council and the General Assembly on human rights defenders, and it is fair to say that they have garnered huge respect as a sensible and accessible interlocutor. People listen to them. So that's kind of the framework of Norway's interaction with human rights defenders. It's very clear at the UN that Norway is the prime mover on the issue of human rights defenders. It was also one of the early states to adopt guidelines on human rights defenders, and I remember when they came out, I thought they were wonderful. And I know now that the guidelines are being updated, and of course that's very good, because obviously things have changed over the last couple of decades. So all this political support to human rights defenders at the council is very it's very important. You know, it really is very important, because you need a champion for everything, and a champion can just move things on a little bit without people often not noticing. You know, and that's really, to me, the essence of diplomacy, that you're able to just move things on a little bit, a little step at a time, and you persuade people. And I think Norway is very good at that. The other thing, of course, I'm very grateful for is the financial support to all the rapporteurs, the special rapporteurs on human rights defenders. When I say all of them, I'm the fourth. So all along, Norway has supported the mandate financially, which is really terrific, because you just get one person, you know, in Geneva, and to work on the mandate. And through this financial report, I can tell you that we have part-time people, expert researchers externally, and who have English, French, Spanish, Chinese, Farsi, Dari, there's something else, Russian, yeah. So it means that we're able to interact, you know, on their own terms with human rights defenders in their own language. And that is really important to me, that it's a direct contact. So I'm very grateful for that. I would say, you know, the same to Norway as I say to every state: you can do more. Mm-hmm. And I have been, and I see Tor Hacken looking down now, I have been asking Norway, and I mentioned it to the Foreign Minister again here, to become more active in trying to push the issue of human rights defenders who are in long-term detention as part of their priority on human rights defenders. Last year, I wrote to 24 states, 148 human rights defenders, and in fact, after my visit to Tajikistan, there's more. These are people who've been sentenced, and I took 10 years as a baseline, and these people have all been sentenced to over 10 years imprisonment. And the trouble is, you know, in the beginning, when people are sentenced, you know, there's a flurry of activity. All the NGOs get involved internationally, the local, the friends, the family, if it's an organisation, the local organisation, if there's local media. You know, there's a bit of activity. But as the years go on, they fade. They fade from the mind as they fade from the sight, and they are locked away. People like us, locked away just because they are trying to defend human rights. And it's always on charges such as subversives or troublemakers or terrorists, or something that allows the state to put them away for long periods. And it's a tactic. It's just to get rid of them. So we have people like in so many, as I said, 24 countries, but just to give you an example, a friend of mine, Mohammed Al-Rakan in United Arab Emirates, his 12-year sentence was due to finish last August, or July, I think. He wasn't released, and now they've put more charges on him. He's a human rights lawyer that I used to cooperate with in UAE before he was imprisoned. And in China, for example, there's one man there who has spent a total of 33 years of his life in prison. So it is a horribly cruel violation. And I really am going to be imploring Norway, and I'll be persevering with this until I'm finished with this mandate. So, and I'd love it written into the guidelines, you know, that for embassies. I just was thinking, you know, when the minister was talking about the guidelines being updated, of course there will be issues that have to be addressed, but it would be good also if a specific reference was made to the plight, getting to know who the people are in the country the embassy is in, who are serving these awfully long sentences and raising their cases. I'm also just one other thing that I do a lot of work wherever I am is on temporary humanitarian visas for human rights defenders at risk, because my experience with human rights defenders is that they don't want to stay in their countries. They really want to, they don't want to leave their countries. They want to stay in their countries and help build civil and just societies, but they, you know, if it's really, really dangerous, or if they just are so burnt out that they need a bit of space, a bit of time, and I was delighted to hear that Oslo has become a breathing city, you know, to have the facility of being able to move quickly is really important to human rights defenders. And I can tell you in my own last job, which was in Frontline Defenders, we had over 1,000 human rights defenders on temporary humanitarian visas in my time there, and less than a handful applied for asylum.
Thanks, Mary. That's a good summary, and yes, we all like praise of our own country, but it's also good to get some examples of things that that Norway can do better and differently. So the minister talked about the guidelines for the Foreign Service. Many of you will know them, but some of you might not. These are guidelines that are for Foreign Service, embassies, diplomats of Norway, and outlining guidelines for how to work to promote and support human rights defenders, promote, protect, and support human rights defenders in the different countries where Norway has diplomatic presence. The current version is from 2010. So there, it's 13 years since they were updated. Very, very happy to know that the Foreign Ministry is updating them now, and also thankful to the Foreign Ministry for being very open and inclusive in that process, seeking input from civil society in Norway. So this question, I guess, is for both of you, and I don't know if Sandra might want to start on this one. So how has the world changed for human rights defenders since this last edition of the guidelines to Foreign Service in 2010? And what change is needed? What other things need to be put into these guidelines now, Sandra?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me in the panel, and welcome to Norway, Mary Lawlor, and also Naghma and Iqtidar, who's here in the Breathing Space City. I'm very happy to be in this panel. And then responding to your question, the MFA guidelines that will be updated now. I was attending a meeting a month ago with stakeholders giving input to this process, and I think a lot of organizations that have been working and using these guidelines towards different embassies will say that, you know, the tools there are really fit for purpose also in the current context. So as you said, Ingeborg, these guidelines provide kind of recommendations to embassies to do several things. For instance, visit human rights defenders in prison, or invite human rights defenders to come to the embassy, to raise human rights defenders' cases at the Universal Periodic Review. So all these things are kind of practical things that embassies can do. So I think that is the kind of starting point. But then, as also it's been highlighted here, that Norway have been heading resolutions at the UN Human Rights Council, and these resolutions are really kind of emphasizing the context that human rights defenders work in. So integrating all those recommendations and all those resolutions that are focusing on, for instance, the effect of COVID on human rights work, or the effect of the technological development to human rights work. Also, these resolutions have highlighted specific human rights defenders, such as environmental human rights defenders, women human rights defenders, how gender affects human rights work, but also human rights defenders working in conflict areas. So I think just integrating what has been done over such a long time at the international level in these guidelines will be important. But in a way, this is also a very practical tool. So what does this mean for embassies, I think is important. But an area that has been raised that I think is interesting is the role of companies and role of investors, because we know that a lot of human rights defenders are at high risk because of that they work in areas where there are great economic interests and also land rights issues. So to kind of integrate that, and also now with the new Transparency Act in Norway, to see how embassies that are also opening doors for Norwegian companies, to see what kind of role can they have here in talking to companies and also follow-up cases will be interesting. But also one thing that's not in the guidelines is there is more a focus on human rights defenders in exile, and to see how embassy can be of a good support to human rights defenders in other countries that are experiences difficulties in their work, I think can be important. But from my point of view, your question to how this can kind of change how embassies are working, I think it boils down to the process. How are these guidelines followed up? Are there incentives for diplomats to work on this? How are they supported? Do they have capacity to go to trials? How are these things followed up? I think that can kind of change possibly this tool. But I also think that there are a lot of feedback from organizations about how certain embassies are actually using these tools already. So,
yeah, good. Mary, thoughts? I know that you often say that there are some things that haven't changed in terms of the risks for human rights defenders. So you might want to talk about that a bit as well. But what are the changes that you see that need to be incorporated into these guidelines?
I suppose, I look back, to when I started, which was the 70s. And clearly things are much different now in terms of you have the whole explosion of the internet and access to information on the one side, and on the other side, the shutting down of the internet because it's become too powerful. But I do think that the kind of human rights violations that defenders are facing have always been with us. But we know more about them now. We know what is happening to women human rights defenders. We know what's happening to LGBT human rights defenders. We know that defenders working on indigenous land and environmental rights are most at risk at killings. Those kind of things, and I think those kind of things need to be fleshed out. And we know that there are people languishing in prison for decades, which we didn't really pay attention to before. We also know that young people and children are becoming more active. I mean, I try and follow sometimes, the number of NGOs and number of human rights defenders, the number of organizations accredited to the UN, blah, blah, blah. And because it is very heartening, I think, for everyone to know that there are more and more people working in human rights now than ever before. And there are some kind of scientific surveys trying to estimate, and the last one that I read was there are 10 million NGOs, which is a lot of people around the world. And I think for human rights defenders, knowing that this kind of solidarity and support is there is good, but it also has to be matched by the support that states give through their guidelines and through their embassies. And sadly, one of the hardest things for me is to get feedback. You know, we raise cases with states. It's so hard to get feedback. And I think there should be a covenant of trust between those organizations that states are interacting with, where they make it clear if they don't want it public, but whoever it is that is advocating on behalf of somebody should get feedback on cases that have been raised. I also would like to see some reference to temporary humanitarian visas in the guidelines. And, you know, we're updating the guidelines in Ireland, and my good friend Ed over there has updated them for the Irish government, and we're hoping to have them now by June, and we'll see how much of what he put in remains. But yeah, so I suppose that's it. But you know, the guidelines that are there, if any state faithfully carried out the implementation of the guidelines that various states have put in place, be it the EU guidelines, the Swiss guidelines, the US guidelines, the Norwegian guidelines, you know, human rights defenders would be far better protected.
So the main challenge still lies in implementation, not in the words on paper, So what we're discussing this morning from different angles is how to defend the human rights defenders. And Sandra, there are a number of formal and informal protection mechanisms that exist today to ensure protection of human rights defenders. What, as you see it, are some strengths and weaknesses of the ecosystem of such protection mechanisms that exist today?
Yeah, thank you for that question.
Big question.
That's something I'm sitting every day and thinking about. But I think I'm going to start with actually this event, and that we're celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Human Rights Defenders Declaration, because it's often said that this is a springboard for all the protection mechanisms that we see today. But I think that I really like Mary's approach to looking a bit back, because there's been a lot of solidarity, a lot of protection practices that, you know, from the trade unions or from churches, from NGOs before this. But I think what the declaration brought in, as you said, Mary, is the right to defend rights, to acknowledge that, you know, individuals and people have a role in defending human rights, and that it's the state's obligations to protect them. So I think that is kind of the starting point. And then we have the mechanism that was set up by the UN Human Rights Council. That is the mechanism that Mary Lawlor is holding now, which is a very formal, you know, position in terms of how that should overlook the implementation of the Human Rights Defenders Declaration. But having said that, I'm a very kind of person who likes graphics, and I often kind of look at this regime, as we would say in research, but and more as an ecosystem, and where we have the human rights defender in the heart, it's the soul of it. And human rights defenders are not only individuals, it's communities, a network, the movement, so the kind of space where people can defend and protect human rights. And then you have these layers that I see it. But these layers are not kind of thick layers where there's a lot of kind of integrations between these layers. But often some research have pointed to that the most important things for human rights defenders are obviously their own tactics. So how do they maneuver their human rights work? But it's also informal people and mechanisms. So that could be friends, it could be a wife, it can be neighbors that are crucial when it comes to protection practices and also alerting to things that are happening. But then we have kind of more formalized, and that's what I will talk a little bit about, is at the national level, you have certain states that have put in place protection mechanisms for defenders. They can apply, and they have cars and help in countries such as Colombia and Mexico, certain in Brazil. But in a way, these are default. It's because the states are not able to protect defenders in the way that they're supposed to. And then you have organizations, and over these years, we see very, very systematic how networks are working, with training, with juridical assistance, with helping to move people. And then we have the international actors. And among them, you have international actors such as PBI or Protection International, that work at the international advocacy level, but they're also very closely to defenders on the ground at the local level. But you also have international actors such as embassies that we did support, that are important stakeholders. And then you have kind of foundations and other human rights organizations. I think the important point, again, is that often it's not one protection mechanism that can support a defender. It's a kind of whole range. And I also think that it's often defenders themselves who knows how to kind of reach out. But I'm going to say something about the challenges to this mechanism, and I think the first one is basically that states are not really implementing the declaration in their countries. The 9 rights that are articulated as crucial when you defend human rights are not only that it's not implemented in certain countries. Basically, countries are giving a legislation that are kind of against this, and we see other agendas such as security or anti-terror agenda that are really hitting towards these rights. The second, it's a little bit unfair, because in certain countries and regions you really have a lot of layers of protection for defenders. In certain countries we have little data about the situation, little monitoring, little training, and weak connection to the international community. We also see that the third challenge is that working with each human rights defender's case is very time consuming. It's a lot of heart and soul to it, so I think that the time, but also the resources, and a lot of protection mechanisms are not geared for long-term support. It's often kind of responding to a very crucial situation. So those are huge challenges. Having said that, I want to say the positive things are that there is a lot of commitment to this cause. A lot of states are working hard at the UN level, but also at the national level, and are financing these networks, are supporting, and also from NGOs, a lot of work that are going into this. And then that is my second point of the strength, is really solidarity, and I think the people connection, and often over time where people are not financed to do a lot of these things. So I think that is the strength. And then we also see that in certain regions now, for instance, the Escazú agreement, which is a regional agreement in Latin America, enables it's a more hardening of these the declaration at the level, so it could be possible to give a stronger protection legally also around human rights defenders.
Yeah, good.
Very good.
Mary, you're at the international end of this, but you also, for those of you who don't know the work of your mandate, what you do is deal with cases of human rights defenders, and these come from local civil society. So I guess also for you there is this connection between the international and the local protection mechanisms.
Yes, and I totally agree with Sandra that she talked about her layers. I always remember when I started Frontline, I had the defender in the centre, and I put all these little boxes about what I was hearing, what they needed. And it is exactly as you say. It could be something at one time, it could be legal, it could be medical, it could be a visit from an embassy, it could be... Now, when it comes to observing trials, obviously embassies in Brazil, couldn't go to the Amazon to observe a trial. But what every embassy can do of any country is they can make it clear over and over and over again publicly that they support the right of human rights defenders to carry out their legitimate peaceful work. They recognize human rights defenders and they give credibility to human rights defenders. That costs nothing, either politically, really, if you think of it in terms of the declaration to which all the states of the UN have adopted the declaration. I always remember just this time past, the Lithuanian ambassador said to me, everyone loves human rights defenders until they're in their own country. And it's so true, because I had an online meeting with them, because they have just brought in an emergency law in Lithuania to allow pushbacks of refugees, migrants and asylum seekers. So I didn't say who he was before, but I feel quite happy to say now in public that because like, this is why I say there's no such thing as a good government. Everyone is driven by their own political and strategic interests. And there seems to be a disconnect between acting out of a purely human rights, not pure, I don't even mean pure, because nothing can be pure. But, you know, everyone can ask searching questions. Everyone can make it clear that they intend to abide by international standards through their actions. So I'm all for Sandra.
I didn't think there was much disagreement between you. Maybe to shift the focus a little bit before we bring on the remaining two panelists today. Mary, your recent report to the UN Human Rights Council shifts this focus from violations committed against human rights defenders to what is successes, often unacknowledged, of human rights defenders. Why did you choose this approach in this year, marking the 25th year anniversary of the declaration? And why is it important to talk about positive contributions of human rights defenders?
Well, I think at last count we talked to over 1,200 human rights defenders directly in small groups of 2s and 3s and half a dozens and 10s, as well as hundreds of webinars over the last 3 years. And because it was so difficult to get your head around who they were, where they were, what they were doing, we sent out a little questionnaire, just a one-page, easy one, simple stuff, name, country, what you're doing, how's COVID affected you, that was during COVID. But one question was small victories. And I've all my life I've been interested in impact, you know, so for me, and we got a wealth of information from that. And then we had the consultations and more information. And I just thought, you know, when I read my own reports, I get very sad. But I just thought it would be lovely to show that human rights defenders are doing such amazing work in helping to build civil and just society, and they don't give up. And they are so relentless in their search for justice that it needed to be acknowledged. And that was really why I thought we should do it this year in the 25th anniversary, to show how far human rights defenders have come and what they are doing. And you know, we all hear, like my reports before this were on killings of human rights defenders, anti-corruption human rights defenders, long-term detention of human rights defenders, defenders of refugees, migrants and asylum seekers, those kind of things. And they were all heartbreaking. And so for me to be able to show what it is exactly that human rights defenders do and how much they are achieving was very important to me, to thank them, because nobody ever thanks human rights defenders for doing the wonderful work, you know, and it's very alienating, hard and hopeless at times. And to be able to continue day after day under those circumstances really deserves attention, I think. So that was really why I did it. Now, it doesn't mean that we're just trying to put a false spin on good news, you know, to do with human rights defenders, because even in identifying how they succeeded, like there's an organization of children in Bangladesh who are under threat, who are working against child marriage, you know, so, and they have succeeded in some cases in stopping child marriage. Now, even by saying that, you hear what's happening to them. They're under death threat. some of them, and they have succeeded. So it's not as if you're choosing one or the other. So, and also, like, I probably have quite a strict definition of human rights defenders. I don't take up political activists, and I know the difference between, as I keep telling states, a political activist and a terrorist. Because any state that wants to tell me I'm wrong, it's usually because they're a terrorist or an opposition figure or something like that. Now, I mean, I would take up somebody who is a democracy activist, but once they've been elected, I don't take up, because it's easier there's so many mandates and so many other mechanisms. I think for me, one of the things that I want to do, try to do with the mandate, is to just keep honing back to what it is that human rights defenders do. They defend the human rights in accordance with international standards that have been agreed by states. They work peacefully for the rights of other people. That's what it boils down to. And it's always the people on the edge. It's always the people whose voices aren't heard, who aren't part of society in a way that allows their voices to be heard. And society often is also against these people. So that's really why I wanted to do it.
No, good. And I think that it's interesting how there's, like you say, a strategy behind it. It's not just showcasing the positive stories for the sake of it. And I think for many of us involved in human rights, celebrating those small victories is really the fuel that drives us forward, because we know that the work is going to be continuous. There's no hill that you climb once and then you're there on top forever. So I think that celebrating victories is also the fuel that drives the movement.
Yeah.
But Sandra, also, I think that since today we're also discussing protection, maybe the question goes for both of you. Is there protection also in celebrating the victories and telling the positive stories?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, for example, when it comes to protection, showing how human rights defenders are working, what they are achieving, how they are contributing to society, bringing their voices out, is a protection in itself. And it's like the awards that countries often give to human rights defenders. You know, when you increase the visibility and the recognition and the credibility of a human rights defender, it acts as a protection because it decreases the political cost. And we've had examples of this in countries even like Iran and China, where we've seen very small successes in terms of cases.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I would also like to add that I think this kind of report is in the human rights movement can be also an internal process. There is a lot of focus on the psychosocial aspect of activism and the danger of burnout for many human rights defenders. The human rights defenders and organizations are working on very systematic issues, very hard issues. So I think, kind of just constantly working, and if there's no stop of thinking, what have we achieved, small or big, it's a danger. So when I've been thinking about this, is that there is an academic called Sicking, and she wrote a book called Evidence of Hope. And in that book, she really points to the importance of celebrating victories. And that is really important in terms of stopping and kind of not feeling that, whatever, it doesn't matter what we do, it won't change everything. And she says in that book that if the bar is, we will not stop, we cannot celebrate before any person on this earth are not experiences human rights abuse, then that is kind of a huge danger to the movement. So I think that report that kind of highlights small and big victories is really important. And I think these kind of reports should be, and it should be a conversation with UN member states as well. This is the contribution, because that was really the motivation that drove the declaration. That was the key role that individuals and groups have in human rights promotion. So I think talking about what happens, and also maybe what would have happened if they were not there, because maybe that could also, that's a little bit more of a trickier one, but I think that is also a part of it. But it's an important internal reflection, I think, also for organizations and people.
Absolutely. Thanks. I think we will bring on the two final panelists of today and also bring in the link to the local, to this global. So Naghma and Omar, please join us on stage. And please give them a hand. So let me introduce, before we move on, the two additional panelists. Naghma Iqtidar is a human rights defender, and she's a member of the steering committee of the Sindh Human Rights Defenders Network from Pakistan. She has worked on human rights issues, and we'll hear a bit more from her directly, such as forced disappearances, women's rights, and workers' rights. Naghma was also the previous General Secretary of the Democratic Students Federation, the largest student federation in Pakistan. She now creates history by being the first ever human rights defender coming to Oslo under what in English is termed breathing space city for human rights defenders, and in Norwegian has the slightly better word, pusteromsby for menneskerettighetsforkjempere. Omar Samy Gamal is Vice Mayor for Culture and Sports in Oslo, representing the Socialist Left Party. He first held the position as Vice Mayor for Employment, Integration and Social Services, but from June 2020 has been Vice Mayor for Culture and Sports. Omar is a champion for this Pusteromsby project and someone who understands the important links between the local and the global here in Oslo as well. So we're glad to have you both. I thought that I would start by giving a very brief overview of the Pusteromsby, or Breathing Space City initiative, since I know that many of you have probably not heard about it, but you will be hearing much more about it in the years to come. Pusteromsby is an initiative with the aim of creating a breathing space for human rights defenders at risk. The goal is that the human rights defenders will come to Oslo for a 3-month stay to take a break from their everyday life and their work as human rights defenders. The hope is that they will then return to their home countries with an increased and strengthened network, having rested, having recuperated, leaving with feelings of solidarity and support in their luggage when they go back from Oslo. Breathing Space City will also be a tool to educate a wider audience, namely the citizens of Oslo, on human rights work, and to create solidarity between cities, people and human rights movements around the world. During the pilot period of 2 years, Oslo will be the host city for a total of 8 human rights defenders. The program for their stay will be tailor-made for each human rights defender's need, depending on their capacity and their wishes. The project is funded by Amnesty International, Oslo Kommune, Open Society Foundation and Fritt Ord, and it's a joint project with the municipality, the Norwegian Helsinki Committee, the Rafto Foundation, Amnesty International, the Human Rights House Foundation, and us in the Norwegian Human Rights Fund. So that's a bit of an introduction. Omar, Pusteromsby Oslo is something that the City Council has had on the agenda for a while, and finally it has materialized.
Yes.
Why is it important for you that the city takes on a role in protection of human rights defenders? You could have simply said, this is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs role, but why is it local initiatives like this important to you?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation. As a city, we often speak a lot about human rights and here in Oslo, and honestly, I think it's because we truly are engaged in human rights. But then it's because of that, it's even more important to take concrete actions and concrete steps to fight for human rights. And with more than half of the world's population living in cities, I believe that human rights should be on top of the agenda of all cities around the world, and not only an issue for on the national level. And also Oslo has a long tradition of being a shelter city for persecuted authors. And I'm very happy that we now managed to establish a similar scheme for champions of human rights. And I also would like to thank you and thank the Norwegian Human Rights Fund, Amnesty Norway, the Norwegian Helsinki Committee, and the Rapporteur Foundation, because it's you that took the initiative and you pushed us to establishing Oslo as a breathing space for human rights defenders.
Good. Thank you. We'll be hearing a bit more from you later, but I want to move to Naghma. Naghma, as I said, you are making history. You are the first participant in Oslo as a breathing space city for human rights defenders. Can you first tell us a bit about your human rights work in Pakistan?
First of all, thank you so much and having a part of this important panelist. Yeah, I am a hardcore activist from in university and college life. Starting my work in student politics and youth politics because we have many issues. It's very like heaven if we are in Oslo and we are sitting here and talking about like issues. But in Pakistan, we are like, especially in 62-63% of younger people around 16 to 38. So we have not good quality education because I was going in public university, so we are facing like many issues. But my friends, like in university campus, they picked up. So I like really very hurt about enforced disappearance is a big challenge for Pakistan. We have conservative society as a women human rights defender, so you have more challenging faces like my male co-partners. And third one is like we have like many time we have seen in many women and many people are like in, because we have an ethnic issue, religious some issues, blasphemy issues, labor issues, and we are like, but it's if you are alive and you are front, so you work like that for your own culture rights. You try to like you work with like human rights. We have like some journalist friend, so they missing, so they starting. I try to myself. It's very important and very hard issue enforced disappearance in Pakistan because you don't know whereabout, and you are going in police station, you try to like court, but still our friends and we don't know about where. So it is very important we are doing for something.
So you introduce yourself as a hardcore activist,
yeah.
And I think that is true. But
because I faced it many times because I was attacked 3 times. So it's very hard for us, like how we are big voice like for voiceless people.
And why did you feel like it was the time to take a breathing space and come here?
I like 1 decade, like 10 years, I worked continuously, like protests and meetings and doing some victim families, and it's very hostile. So we don't have like any. So some senior colleagues suggest me this opportunity, and including Sandra, she's tried to like, and my NHRF people, because they work in Pakistan also. So I received this opportunity, so I avail, yes, I can. And maybe it's very important for me that we are learning here something, and we like learn for some human rights about, and when we are take some fresh perspective, and we back like, so I doing there on my own country.
Good. Omar, in addition to giving a breathing space to human rights defenders like Naghma, there's also a goal of the project that the citizens of Oslo will be able to learn more about the work of human rights defenders and get involved. So why is it important for you in the City Council to lift up and support citizen engagement in international issues?
First of all, I have to say, Naghma, that I'm very proud to sit here with you. I have parents from Egypt, and we have very much the same struggles and same issues there, and especially regarding students and the disappearing of students. And so I would like to thank you for the work that you do, and people like you do. It's really an honor to share stage with you. So thank you very much. And to your if you want to clap, it's
yes, absolutely.
I'll try to explain your or answer your question with an example, because you and try to listen to tell you why it's important that cities take actions, and not only that we take actions on a national level. In the last few years, world leaders have also taken ambitious and necessary decisions by adopting other international landmarks agreements. And in 2015, the UN member states agreed on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the 17 sustainability goals for its realization. And one of the key challenges in reaching the goals set in the 2030 Agenda and also in the Paris Agreement is the fragmentation of responsibilities between the global and the local level. While countries are signatories of agreements, cities must, and we very much feel that responsibility to lead the way in tackling those challenges hands-on. And so, and I believe it's the same argument that can be made when it comes to peace and human rights. National states, they have as one the core responsibilities to prevent war and conflict, but local governments, city societies, the business community, and local and international organizations must be involved. And not only involved, but also they need to push for change. And that's what we see all around the world, that cities are the ones that push for change and try to lead by example. And that's why it's important both for us as a city, but also it's important so we remember that we are not what should I say, immune to the issues and the problems around the world, and that the issues around the world very much are also our issues. So that's why it's important, and we need to build that understanding in that core of democracy from the ground up, and not only in the city hall and in the discussions over there.
Good. I think that human bond between people is always what creates the most solidarity and understanding. Yeah. Mary, with your experience, how can initiatives like Breathing Space City Oslo be important for human rights defenders who are in need of a break, feeling of solidarity, motivation, support?
Well, I love the name, Breathing Spaces. I just think it's such a spot-on name. I mean, I've been at the 10th anniversary of Shelter Cities in The Hague last year, and the year before I was at the 10th anniversary of the Spanish program. So I've met a lot of defenders and people who are involved in the programs in those countries, and of course our own one in Ireland. But I think the key is, apart from what the training or going back with new skill, and a new skill, be it digital security, or be it analysing risk, or whatever you want. I think just to have time breathe, you know, and to relax and to kind of have a space where you're not having to be thinking about what you have to do next, you know, in the same way, or you're not confronted with these awful stories and tales and expectations from the people that you're working with. I think that's all really, really good. And I think the secret of the most successful ones are how well they are integrated into the community. Because it's all, you know, we're all in a bubble. I mean, there's no getting away from it. You know, those of us who are interested in human rights, peace, security, blah, blah, you know, and the link between all three. We are in a bubble, and it's a bubble of a minority. So the more, as you said, that you can, you know, integrate into the community and people become part of the community. I always used to think when I was director of Amnesty, I used to say to groups, you know, be they country groups in different villages or towns or universities or schools, I'd say start with your own community. Because if you start, you don't have to be looking at, oh God, what are we going to do out there? You know, your world is your community. And that's where you can make a difference, you know, to start with, where you can build solidarity, where you can build understanding, where you can build awareness of what is going on.
I just wanted to take a quick detour, Sandra, to something that Omar was mentioning, that we're also not immune here in Norway. How can we ensure that Norway's engagement for human rights defenders on the international level is also mirrored at home? And what are some examples of things that are working well and some challenges that we also have in Norway?
Yeah. Well, the National Institution made a report in 2020, and it was basically trying to map the situation of human rights defenders in Norway. And it was quite a comprehensive process of really trying to get, you know, from both organized and also individual human rights defenders the status. And I think in that report, it's very clear that the legal framework around protecting right to defend rights in Norway is very well ensured, and is also enshrined in the Norwegian constitution. But it was a few points that were raised. So several of the organizations felt that half of them actually, that they had a very unstable financial situation. And there were also issues related to consultations that were mentioned that could be improved. And also there were vulnerabilities that were raised, especially in using your voice on the internet, of harassment, etc. A lot of these kind of attacks came from private people, but I think still that's important to mention. But I think one recommendation from the National Institution is that there should be these kind of mappings, because things can change quite differently, and you might also have different groups that you see that you need to kind of understand their situation. So that was one of the recommendations from the National Institution, that there needs to be a comparison over time. I think this was the first time it was done in Norway, but I think some experiences that organizations have had when it comes to getting, when people are coming to Norway, human rights defenders in a kind of vulnerable refugee situations, has been that there is a tension between that kind of protection that the Norwegian government can give, or the state, and that of participation. So I think that is something that was very clear when several women human rights defenders were evacuated from Afghanistan in 2021. So the refugee system aren't really geared towards that kind of group. So that was a lot of lobbying and work from some of the organizations, and there was some inclusion of more flexibility in that system. But I also heard a story yesterday about another human rights defender who had come. It took her more than 2 years to get a travel document. And again, what I was talking about, the protection mechanisms, is that human rights work, you often work in networks. So it's important actually to be connected and be able to participate and not be isolated. And I think that's one of the worst things. You're isolated, maybe come out of a very hard situation, and then you're suddenly isolated
from your own community of defenders, but also other networks where you could contribute. So I think there are things we could look at also when it comes to how we can ensure that people are resources when they come here, and they can continue to be a resource for their own country, for their movements, but also be integrated in the work that organizations are doing.
Yeah, good. We will have time for a couple of questions from the audience, short ones, so if someone wants to ask, you can prepare yourselves. But Naghma, I want to end with you. What are your wishes for your stay here in Oslo?
I have already been here for 4 weeks, 4 or 5 weeks. So yes, I have feel great experience, like mental peace, physical peace. Here is secure environment, and we are. I'm thinking about in Karachi and Pakistan. So Mary, as Sandra with us, we have give a HRD's guideline in Pakistani government president in 2019 or 18 something, maybe 20. So, but it's still, I want to, if Mary, you people support us, implementation, not like that. So we are trying to find, because we don't have a HRD's protection in Pakistan. So it is, it's in we are, live here, but it's very peaceful and calm environment. People are very nice, meeting and connection and networking like that. But I'm thinking about when we back, so how to work like that, no?
Yeah.
So it is very important for me. If you people, I want to I do, when I go back to, I do something for my people, for my country, how to more secure for HRD's work, how secure protection of HRDs. It is very important.
This was my final question to you, actually. What will you bring with you in your heart and in your mind, you think, when you leave?
To be honest, it is very amazing experience for me, and it's good for me, and yeah, I say, it's something's heaven.
You feel like it's heaven? You didn't come in November when it's all dark, so that's a good thing. Thank you so much to our panel. We will take a couple of short questions, so please raise your hand if you have questions, and please introduce yourselves and let us know who the question is for. Yes?
Helena from the Nobel Peace
Yeah,
Center.
there's a mic. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Helena from the Nobel Peace Center. Thank you all so much. This was very inspiring. I have many questions, but I'll go with one. I'm interested in how we can have more shelter cities, more pusterumsby. And I wonder if you have thoughts on that. Are there sort of specific hindrances in the way of getting more cities on board with this? And are there particular cities that are close to deciding, and what's standing in their way? Kind of ideas. Thank you.
I'll say quickly from our side as Secretariat that is the hope, that this is a pilot period and that it can be extended here in Oslo, but also expand to other cities. And like Mary said, in the Netherlands, for instance, there is a whole network of shelter cities. But Omar, I don't know the thoughts from Oslo municipality and the city council on this.
No, absolutely. It's I think we'll learn much from this period, from this pilot. And I hope that we can share our experiences with other parts of the country, other cities.
Yeah.
And I think there is a lot of politicians local politicians around the country that wants to engage in human rights and international issues and themes like that. But they see it as a little bit difficult to they don't know how to start. And so this can be one way to engage in human rights issues for local cities.
Yeah. Good. And any other, sorry?
Internationally.
Internationally, Mary.
How can we do it internationally?
Me?
To further scale up the
Well,
networks?
I mean, at the end of the day, everything comes down to political will, just about everything. And it can be at local level, or it can be at state level, or it can be at international level. So when we're talking about breathing spaces or shelter cities or opportunities for human rights defenders to come and for rest and respite, I would argue that the first thing you need is a written temporary humanitarian visa scheme, so that the process is quick, that the process doesn't take endless months, because that is one of the drawbacks of some of these shelter city processes. And if somebody is in real danger, they need to be moved quickly. And if they can't be moved within their country because it's so big, they could get lost somewhere else, you know, or to a neighbouring country. They need to have the opportunity. So I would say that the process needs to be speeded up. The second thing I think is that, you know, what it will come down to is how the experience of this works for Norway and how it can be rolled out, and where people see that it is a plus rather than a minus. And then internationally, I mean, there is a movement, you know, there is is it Justice and Peace?
Yes,
yeah.
in the Netherlands.
Justice and Peace in the Netherlands, and now here. Spain, there's a long-standing programme for human rights defenders to come from between 3 months and a year, well, 6 months, but sometimes a year, from Spanish-speaking countries like Colombia and Latin America. So it really depends on, again, like everything else, the persuasive power of individual human rights defenders like yourself, to put pressure on your lovely officials, and who will then hopefully put pressure on others. And you know, it's always about, as Sandra said earlier on, you know, hope is what fuels human rights defenders. And you know, if you look at it up there, you just won't get up in the morning. But if you look on human rights work as just part and parcel of your day-to-day life, and you're achieving little steps along the way, that's all you can hope for, and it's enough. And once human rights defenders see that they have achieved a little increase in the protection of human rights, or have done something that they're proud of, it fuels them to keep going to the next step. So obviously, you know, here you are in Norway. For you at the moment, it's creating other breathing spaces in other cities in Norway. It seems to me like Bergen would be a great place too. But, you know, after that, it's about, you know, the advocacy about why it's a good thing for human rights defenders, A, to be able to move quickly should they need rest and respite or are in extreme danger. Yesterday I said, one of my friends, Natasha Estramarova, she was a member of Memorial and she was murdered. She had just done a report on torture in Chechnya, and she was murdered. And she was just going to work, and she was abducted and brought to a couple of hours away, and she was shot twice. And it was after that that we decided in Frontline we had to try and work out how you can help protect people before something happens. And one of the things we thought in her case was that it was, because she had been to us in Dublin, one of the things we thought that we should have done there was, she had done a report with Human Rights Watch, and it was published, and we felt that if we had suggested to her, obviously it would have been her decision, that she come out for a bit while the report was published, until the level of interest died down, she might not have been killed, you know. So that's why people need fast-acting visas quickly, you know.
I think with that we will be,
come in quickly. Like it's Oslo, because it's my first experience, because I don't have seen like shelter home as a defender. But I think you people, Oslo and Norway, deserve like clean environment and people are friendly of environment and you want to like greener. So it's very like common and not like a unique example for defender. You live in breathing space city. So I think is purely what I say, like it is completely, Oslo is like 100% merit on this for breathing space city. Yes.
That's a great way to end, Naghma. Thank you all four of you for this wonderful conversation from the international to the local. And I think that we also consider it now as a kickoff for Breathing Space City Oslo for human rights defenders. We have representatives from Bergen here and the Rafto Foundation, who are also a part of this project. So definitely we might even just challenge Bergen from the stage to pick up the baton. I know that Kjersti wants to give some final words before we leave, so please, Kjersti.
Thank you so much, Ingeborg. I just want to thank the wonderful panel for all your insights and knowledge and what you've been sharing. And thank you so much, Ingeborg, for your wonderful moderation today. And then I want to take this opportunity to remind you that at the Nobel Peace Center, we will have the Peace Conference on the Nobel Peace Conference on August 31st. The name of the conference is Human Rights Heroes. And at that conference, we're going to talk about just the issues you have discussed today. Lawlor will be back in Oslo for the 31st of August, together with the laureates from last year. They will be presenting their call to action for the world in order to defend human rights defenders. So, with that in mind, I just want to make sure that you all write in your diary to set out a date. And the program will be available very soon. And then with that, thank you so much for enlightening us this morning. We give the panel a big applause. And thank you, Ingeborg.